so my apologies. Life has been a little bit chaotic, but just with the massive spread of the COVID-19 outbreak, I really was feeling motivated to get back in and try and just put some positivity back into the world. It's a little bit crazy right now, but hello, if you're new here, my name is Emma. I'm the one who runs this YouTube channel, as well as the Instagram blog Tea and God, and links for everything else are down in the description if you guys do want to check those out. But before we dive into our scriptures for the day today, I want to tell you about our fancy smancy tea of the day today. It's in this little teacup that I've used before. It's got purple roses on it, and it is a very, very red tea, so she gone stain. That's all I have to say. But I don't know how to say the brand. It's from a pen pal of mine that I have in Austria. It tastes really good. It's cherry tea. If I can try and find it, I will link it, but if not, sorry. She mailed it to me, and I've been waiting to try it for the next time I filmed, and it's been a hot minute, so yeah. But again, as usual, we normally do a psalm of the day and then dive into our scripture for the day. But today I found a portion of Joel that I wanted to read instead of a psalm for today. So let's dive right on in. So as usual, though, I am using an English Standard Version Bible. This one's by Crossway Books, and it is journaling Bible. So it's a single column, so it has one column, and then it has the room in the margins for notes and things. But today we are going to be starting in Joel chapter 2, starting in verse 12, which says, "Yet even now, declares the Lord, return to me with all your heart, with fasting, with weeping, and with mourning, and rend your hearts and not your garments." And I just want to stop there, starting verse 13. Verse 12 opens and it says, "Yet even now." And I think that's something we really need to remember in today's culture right now, because everybody is so shrouded in fear and worry and is panic buying everything, and it's just absolute chaos. And I think that even now we need to remember that God is still in control, even if it doesn't seem like this is something that should be happening. He still has control and is sovereign over it. And it says, return to me with all your heart. He doesn't want just part of us, he wants all of us. And I think that that's something that we oftentimes forget as Christians, especially when we are earlier in the walk, or once we've been in the walk for a long time, and you start to forget how much of you God wants. And he wants a full sacrifice. He doesn't want just a partial one. So continuing into verse 13, it says, "And rend your hearts and not your garments. Return to the Lord your God, for he is gracious and merciful, slow to anger and abounding in steadfast love, and he relents over disaster." And I think that this is, again, just really important, because it's calling us to return to God, because he's gracious and he's merciful, and he's slow to anger, and he's abounding in steadfast love, and he relents over disaster. And I think that these are just, again, so important to remember, because even if we have been allowing ourselves to get taken over by fear and doubt and worry in this time, because it is really chaotic, it is a scary thing to have happening, to have such a widespread disease that's growing around like crazy. But we still need to remember that God is gracious and merciful, and that he is the one that is sovereign, and that he has all total control. It's still important to remember that he is slow to anger, and he's abounding in steadfast love. Even if we turn away or fall away, or even if we pursue him less, he still is abounding with steadfast love. And it continues into verse 14. It says, "Who knows whether he will not turn and relent, and leave a blessing behind him, a grain offering and a drink offering for the Lord your God." And again, I just think that this is really important, because who knows if he's going to turn and relent? Who knows that if we all start praying, and if we all start going prayerfully after something, if it'll change or not? It might not, but what's the harm in trying if it's not going to, if it could change, you know what I mean? If we bring sacrifices, and he could leave a blessing behind him, he could take it and leave a blessing in his wake, you know what I mean? Like, we need to stop living in so much fear, and we need to start recognizing that our God is powerful, and that he is strong, and that he is sovereign over everything that we have around us. And then in 15 it says, "Blow the trumpet in Zion, consecrate a fast, call a solemn assembly, gather the people, consecrate the congregation, assemble the elders, gather the children, even nursing infants. Let the bridegroom leave his room and the bride her chamber." I think that's important, because this reminds us of the importance of community, even in a time where we might not be able to literally get together and have community, because that could make it spread more. We still need to remember to have that community around us. We are so much more connected than we used to be. We can call someone, we can FaceTime someone, we can write letters, we can text them, we have so many different ways to communicate now that our grandparents and our great-grandparents and our parents didn't have when they were growing up. And so it's something that I think we oftentimes take for granted, but our world is so connected, and we can use that to truly get a little bit more connected in the time that we're in right now, in this season of having to be isolated from others. And obviously it isn't exactly the same as seeing someone face to face, but I think it's still something that we should be really using to supplement in this time when we don't have another option. And it's just, again, really important for us to remember that we are consecrated people. We are set apart for God's purposes, not for our own, not for the purposes of another man, but for God's purposes and for his purposes alone. And we really need to walk in that and remember that. And I think that that is one of the parts that a Christian community is so important, is that they hold us accountable for what God has for us and for what he wants for us. So I wanted to do our next series on the book of Ecclesiastes because I love the book of Ecclesiastes. It can be kind of depressing, but it's one of my favorites. And I just think that it's something that is really important to remind ourselves of, especially right now when there is so much chaos and so much fear and lack of hope in our society, when this is something that I think could be really helpful for us to remember and to turn back to. So we're going to go, like I said, in the book of Ecclesiastes, starting in verse 1, and it says, "The words of the preacher, the son of David, king in Jerusalem. Vanity of vanities, says the preacher, vanity of vanities, all is vanity. What does man gain by all the toil at which he toils under the sun? A generation goes and a generation comes, but the earth remains forever. The sun rises and the sun goes down and hastens to the place where it rises." I'm going to pause there at the end of verse 5 just to dive back in and then go back, because I don't want to separate this portion of the chapter, but just to make it easier to do deeper dives. I love how in verse 2 it says that all is vanity, because when you really think about it, everything really is vanity. I mean, do you need to have long hair? No. Do you need to have a job to live? Yes and no. You could grow everything and not necessarily need money, but do you need a car? Do you need a fancy car? Do you need a radio? Do you need a record player? Do you need tea? Do you need plants? What do you need? It's kind of funny to think about how we place so much value, especially in Western culture, on riches, on what you're wearing, what you look like, what job you have, like your title at your job. That's something that's really important. What your yearly income is, what your spouse looks like, what your spouse looks like, what your spouse does for work, how many kids you have, what their grades are. All these things that really, do they matter? Do they tell you whether or not someone is a good or bad person? No, they don't. And I think that it's, again, really important, because what does man gain by all the toil at which he toils under the sun? I mean, think about it. In Western society, at least as far as I'm aware, for the most part, we have just paper money, like credit cards and stuff, but we have cards and paper money. But what if the government decided, oh, well, this is not this paper, it's just a piece of paper, it doesn't mean anything anymore. The only reason that our money means something is because we're told that it means something. But we aren't a society that uses gold or silver where there's an actual set amount that it's worth. We just use literally a piece of paper, and that's something where you think about it. If someone were to say, oh, well, paper money means nothing because we need stuff that we can actually use, you need to use a bartering system again, or you need gold and silver, all of your toil would be wasted. And it's something that I think that's why it's so important to know how to provide for yourself, even if it's not necessarily financially, like knowing how to grow food, how to raise animals of some kind, how to do these things that are helpful, not necessarily monetarily, but are still important to know, how to knit or sew or crochet or do these things that, while not necessarily going to be your main source of income, knowing how to do these things still gives you the ability to trade later, to have the skills to be able to literally live if you needed to. And then continuing into verse 4, generation goes and a generation comes, but the earth remains forever. This is, again, it's an endless cycle until, Jesus comes back. And while that can seem kind of depressing, it's also not, because while, like right now, we are living in a world where a lot of people are dying. And while obviously we don't want people to die as Christians, at the same time, they were going to die eventually anyways, and we don't necessarily know why certain people are dying and certain people are not, but we know that God has a time on everybody, and he only will take them home when he's calling them home. And so while it might seem really unfortunate, I think we often also forget that earth is second best. Earth is not the best thing ever. Heaven is. So if a Christian gets this virus and dies, it's not necessarily that they were a bad Christian and that's why they got sick, or that, God hates them and that's why they got sick. Sometimes it's just somebody's time to go home. And that's something that I think as people, especially in a Western society, we tend to forget, is that we are literally going to all die at some point. Whether that's a virus, whether that's getting hit by a car, whether that's jumping out of a plane, your parachute not working, I don't know. You could get gored by a bull or a cow of some kind with horns. You don't know what's going to get you. And I think that we so often idolize this world and we idolize Earth as a whole that we forget that this is second best and that dying is not a horrible thing to happen. It's the best thing that's ever going to happen to any of us because it gives us a chance to be able to go home. So continuing into verse 6, it says, "The wind blows to the south and goes around to the north. Around and around goes the wind, and on its circuits the wind returns. All streams run to the sea, but the sea is not full. To the place where the streams flow, there they flow again. All things are full of weariness, and man cannot utter it. The eye is not satisfied with seeing, nor the ear filled with hearing. What has been is what will be, and what has been done is what will be done, and there is nothing new under the sun." And I really want to highlight 6 and 7 because it reminds us of how oftentimes we are on a hamster wheel. We get up, make breakfast, go to work, come home, watch Netflix, go to bed. And it's just a cycle that goes over and over and over, and we aren't actually doing anything to grow ourselves. We aren't doing anything to grow who we are as people, or grow in our faith, or develop into the type of person and develop into the roles that God is preparing us for and has been preparing us for since the beginning. And I think that we need to remember, like in verse 8, how all things are full of weariness, and man cannot utter it. The eye is not satisfied with seeing, nor the ear filled with hearing. We're never going to be satisfied with things of this world because this is all a reflection, it's all a shadow. It's not the real thing. And when we realize that, that's when we can truly begin to find freedom and truly begin to seek after things above, because those are what really matter and what are really going to last in the long run. Because, like I said, if we all decided that paper money means nothing, all of your work, all the money that you have saved up, it doesn't exist. And we need to find satisfaction and be content in knowing that we have God, not knowing that we have X amount in the bank, not knowing that we have a car that runs, not knowing that we have a family. We need to find our contentment in God, because all of the things could be taken away in a snap. An earthquake could happen, and everybody and everything that you know and love could die, and you're the only one left. Are you still going to be able to be content and happy in that situation? I mean, obviously you would mourn it for losing people, but would you be able to come back from that and be happy still? Or would you just be so lost because everything that you actually cared about is gone, and it's really putting your faith to the test? Because how could God do that when God is still sovereign and God is still in control and he still knows what is happening and why it's happening? So continuing into verse 10, it says, "Is there a thing of which it is said, 'See, this is new'? It has been already in the ages before us. There is no remembrance of former things, nor will there be any remembrance of later things yet to be among those who come after." And I think that that's something, I think that that's essentially saying that, our lives are kind of not, they're important, but in the long run, this isn't where everything matters. Earth is not the end goal. That's heaven, and it's not like you're going to remember every single thing you ever possibly could have done once you're in heaven, because that's not what's important in heaven. Praising God is what's important. Spending time with him, that's what really matters. And when you realize that, our values and our our priorities will really begin to change. So continuing into verse 12, it says, "I, the preacher, have been king over Israel and Jerusalem, and I applied my heart to seek and to search out by wisdom all that is done under heaven. It is an unhappy business that God has given to the children of man to be busy with. I have seen everything that is done under the sun, and behold, all is vanity and is striving after wind." And I think that it's really important that we apply our hearts, because so often we can throw them into things and just commit before any of it is really evaluated, whether that be to a new job, to a new person, to a new class, to a new whatever. We really need to evaluate, is this something good? Are we really applying ourselves in this area of our lives, or are we just Doesn't matter. Like, we really need to evaluate whether or not these things are going to bring us closer or farther away from God, and whether or not those are what He's wanting us to go after as well. And I also think that it's important how in verse 14 it says that so much of what we do is striving after wind, because, think about it. How much of what you do really matters? Does it really matter whether you're a size 2 or a size 24? Obviously you want to be healthy, don't get me wrong, but healthy looks different on everybody. Does it really matter what type of car you drive, or if you have a car at all? As long as you're able to get where you need to go, it doesn't really matter whether you're driving a Porsche or a sorry, my brother just burped to distract me. Whether you're driving a Porsche or a Toyota, it doesn't matter. So continuing into verse 15, it says, "What is crooked cannot be made straight, and what is lacking cannot be counted. I said in my heart, I have acquired great wisdom, surpassing all who were over Jerusalem before me, and my heart has the great experience of wisdom and knowledge, and I applied my heart to know the wisdom and to know madness and folly. I perceive that this also is but a striving after wind, for in much wisdom is much vexation, and he who increases knowledge increases sorrow." And I, again, want to just highlight that we need to apply our hearts, and that most of what is happening on earth is striving after wind. Whenever the Bible repeats something, whenever any type of book or story or whatever repeats something, it means that it's important, and it's calling our brains to pay attention. So when we're told, again, apply your heart, and recognize that a lot of what is done on earth is striving after wind, that's reminding us, this is important, pay attention to this is important. And I love verse 18, because it reminds us that knowledge can bring sorrow. While it can bring such joy to truly understand things, it also is really sad sometimes, because it's hard to see people doing things that isn't good for them. It's hard to see people you love get into bad situations when they should know better. It's hard to watch someone you love get sick because of the choices that they made rather than just, chance. But it's just, I think that sometimes people forget that we're allowed to experience all the emotions on this earth. I know people at old churches that I went to that essentially would say, oh, Christians can never get sick and can never be sad because that's not what God wants for us. But then you see times where Jesus wept, the shortest verse in the Bible, but in Matthew 14, before Jesus feeds the 5,000, in verse 13, or in verses 12 and 13 of Matthew 14, John the Baptist was just beheaded, and so John's disciples came and tell Jesus, and it says in verse 13, "Now when Jesus heard this, he withdrew from there in a boat to a desolate place by himself." And I think that this is saying that, Christ was taking a minute to just mourn the loss of this person that he loved. The fact that Jesus wept, I forget which verse that is because I'm horrible with my references, but the fact that Jesus wept and that he also, he did withdraw to truly process what had happened, that's telling us that, it's okay for us to mourn when someone we love dies. But then it's also still important for us to love on others. Continuing in verse 13, it says, "But when the crowds heard it, they followed him on foot to the towns." Verse 14, "When he went ashore, he saw a great crowd, and he had compassion on them and healed their sick." And while I think that it's okay for us to experience sadness, to experience grief, to experience happiness, joy, any of the emotions on the spectrum, we still need to remember that ultimately everything in life is going to pass. That's part of the human experience. That's part of the earth experience. Everything is going to grow. It's going to grow, start small, it's going to grow, and it's going to fall. That's how everything from, a tree to a person works. We're born, we live a life, we die. That's kind of the circle of life, and I think that so often, especially in a more Americanized Christianity, we forget that, and we get so cocky and that, oh, well, God's just gonna do everything for me, because while he does do stuff for us, at the same time, we are all still going to experience hardships on this earth. The Bible tells us that a lot, and that's to remind us that in those times, it's not that God hates us, it's that that's part of life. And I think that that's something that going into this season of quarantining, into the season of however long it's going to be that everything is closed and chaotic because of this virus, we need to remember that, while, this isn't the ideal dream that any of us want, I'm sure, at the same time, we need to remember that we are going to experience hardships like this in our lives. And I mean, okay, look back in the 30s and 40s. Like, we are going through nothing compared to what the people then went through. People are still freaking out and like so sad about it and all this stuff. I mean, yes, sad. It is really sad to see how many people are getting sick and how many people are dying. But at the same time, what we can do to help them, it's so easy. I mean, and a lot of the stuff that we're supposed to do with this, we should be doing anyway. We should be going out to eat and out to the movies and stuff less, because it's a lot of money to do that. We shouldn't be buying so much excess stuff, because do we really need half the stuff that's in an American home? Do I really need to have an easel? No, that's the wrong side. Do I really need to have an easel? No, but I enjoy it and I got it for free. So, you know, do we really need to have a whole bunch of I'm trying to think. Do we really need to have as many clothes as we have? Do we really need to all have jewelry that we don't use that much? Do we really need to have all these things that we have been told over how many decades that are so important and so necessary, and, you know, we need them, and that pull on our human nature of wanting things, when really they're not important at all? And I don't know. I just really hope that, you know, throughout the study of Ecclesiastes, reading a book like this can bring hope, but also bring encouragement. And it's a book that I feel like a lot of places don't want to read, because it is kind of a negative book. I mean, let's be honest, when it says all is vanity all the time, that's a little depressing. But like, at the same time, we need to read the books that not every church is going to want to read, you know, because while it might not make us happy and feel great about ourselves, it's still important. And yeah, so that was the end of chapter 1 of Ecclesiastes, and we're not too long, so that's good. But I really hope that you guys are all staying safe and doing well during this virus, and I really hope that this is some form of staving off boredom for you, because I have been very bored myself. And yeah, but as usual, thank you guys so much for watching. I really appreciate it, and I will try and find this one, but I will put it up on the screen just in case any of you guys know how to find it better than I can, because it is not in English. Yeah, so that's a thing. But if you guys were curious, the directions do, you know, it's kind of easy to see. It's just 100 degrees Celsius for 8 minutes, so that was helpful. But anyways, I hope that you guys have a great rest of your day today, and as usual, if you guys have any prayer requests or anything, or just any comments or suggestions in general, just please feel free to either comment down below in the comment section or send me a DM on Instagram. I'm pretty available on both of those. But yes, before I ramble on too much more, I just want to thank you guys again so much for watching, and if you guys want to leave a like on the video, that does help the channel to grow, because it helps spread this video to more people that could benefit from it. And as usual, if you guys leave this video knowing nothing else, I hope that you guys know how loved and cherished and precious you are, the God that created you. And I will see you guys in the next video, which is hopefully going to be sometime later this week, but who knows how long this one will take to upload. So yes, and I will see you guys next time. Bye guys.